Welcome back. Thank you for joining us for another exciting episode of The Conversation. I'm your co-host, Onjalé Scott Price, with the illustrious, wonderful, fantastic Reverend Will Mebane. Yeah, that guy. We're really excited about today's show. We have a wonderful guest list for you all for a very interesting topic. Drum roll, please. Racism and politics. This is going to be a really interesting conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. So let's jump right in, and we are going to go to our persons on the street and ask them, where do you see racism in politics? Let's get started.
My knee-jerk reaction is everywhere in politics, because the American political system was obviously substantially formed by white, if I might say, Western European political activists. And though I'm sure they didn't necessarily intend it, at least not wholeheartedly, just by virtue of having its foundation so solidly in white leadership, there was a certain amount of racism that was embedded in our founding fathers. I think a lot of people know that many of them were slave owners, but that is certainly not a comment on my part to take away from all that they did. But the fact that racism entered our political system early on and has persisted for so many years, I think is an unfortunate confirmation that it is embedded in our political system.
Like racism in society, it permeates all of our politics. But one, place sort of locally in particular that we see is just that, a lot of times when we try to talk about issues like affordable housing, we have folks use language that's kind of code. We, hear folks use that coded language, that othering language that is, euphemisms for talking about housing in ways where they're saying, oh, we love affordable housing, but just not here, those type of developments, those type of people. And I think the root of that really is, something that is based in racism, classism as well. But I have consistently heard that, and those objections have consistently been some of the barriers to creating more affordable housing. And that's just kind of one of the issues-based places where I have seen that in local politics. But I think racism permeates politics at every level, just as it does throughout our society.
So we've heard from our people on the street the answer to the question, where do you see racism in politics? As a local politician, I can tell you that this is going to be an interesting conversation because I know I have a lot to say about it, and I'm sure our panelists do. So I'd like to start with Samuel. Samuel Gebru is a senior fellow at the Center for State Policy Analysis at Tufts University. And so Samuel, we're very excited to have you with us, and I'd like to pass it over to you to either tell us where do you see racism in politics, or to comment on anything that the people on the street had to say about that question.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciated the responses that were provided, especially the gentleman in the beginning who rightfully said, this country was founded by slave owners. It was founded by white men who codified laws that benefited them, frankly. And it didn't even benefit all white people. It benefited property owning white people. And that's the sort of crux of the United States. Obviously, in the centuries since, we've done a good job in trying to perfect this union. The job isn't done yet, but what gives me hope is that every generation seems to really take the baton and inch us a little bit towards justice and equity. And so, racism is baked into law. It's codified into every aspect of our life here in the United States, and really by that virtue throughout the world as well. But it doesn't have to be that way. Policy violence, which is, the term that I and many others like to use, was codified through law, and it can be dismantled through law as well. So, for me, as someone who looks at politics and public policy as a way to really move mountains, as a way to improve people's lives, I see it as an opportunity to take a look at the past, study the injustices, and also identify ways that we can be better. And so while racism does exist everywhere in politics, and everywhere, whether it's in our economy, home ownership, academia, you name it, it doesn't have to be that way. And it's really up to us to try to find those avenues to bridge divides. And sometimes it's as simple as just having a cup of coffee with somebody, and just building those bridges, and being able to understand each other, and then realizing that at the end of the day, as people, we have a lot more in common than what divides us.
Well, that last statement is definitely a powerful one. We have more in common than what divides us. And I think we did have a show already that was talking across the aisle, and it was talking about how do we divide that gap between, the different political parties and the us and them. And I think that, like you said, that's something that we need to work on to be able to break down some of these barriers and some of these, structures that have been built specifically race-based. Yeah. I'd like to ask Shea to comment on where you see racism in politics. Shea, we're glad to have you in Falmouth. I know that you came here from Jamaica about 9 years ago and got involved in the community and are now running for the Falmouth School Committee. So good luck with that race. And
Thank you.
glad to have you. If you want to share, where do you see racism in politics?
Oh, thank you for having me. Yes, racism is in politics. And as my grandmother always said, if the top is dirty, the bottom is going to be dirty. So basically what we have to do is try to fix the top. Then when the stream start to run, the water become clear. So we have clean water. And racism started a long time ago. And in some aspect, you could see where they're trying to fix it. It's not come the way maybe we wanted to, but as we are from all different backgrounds, and if we just try to see each other point of view and understand that each person have a different feeling and look at situation differently, and we can consider each other about how they feel, about the way they be talked to or look upon, and we can fix this. It may take time, but it can be done. And racism is not something that we just born with. It was taught to. So now we have to start back from the younger generation. And so where we can try to demolish this from our system.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes me think about what Steve said, where he said that, these systems were created by a very particular group of people. And Samuel, you touched on this as well, and who didn't consider anyone else's point of view, did not consider how the laws would affect people that were not like them. And that's why it's so important to have a diverse group of people working on politics, so you have those different perspectives and those different points of view. What do you think, Rev? What's going on over there in your mind?
Well, I do very much appreciate what Shea and Samuel have shared, as well as what Stephen and Megan shared from the street. You know, racism, as Stephen said, is embedded. It's just part of all aspects of politics. And as Megan said something similarly, she said, you know, racism permeates all politics. And I won't go and rehash what they said, and I won't spend a lot of time looking in the past at how the so-called founding fathers codified racism in politics. I'll move a little farther ahead, and those people who watch this program know that I was raised in the Jim Crow South, and so it was another example of racism being codified in by politicians in law. But then I move even closer to today, or to today, and think about where's racism in politics. You know, it's in our zoning laws, and how what can be built where and by whom, and it's in money that's distributed for education. Politicians choose to put money in some places more than they do in other places, or the use in some communities of property taxes to determine how much money goes into a school system is all based upon a racist system. Today, we're looking in, we're hearing a lot about voter suppression, and we're hearing about gerrymandering and redistricting of congressional seats. Those maps are being drawn with an eye towards race and who's in those districts. And I think it's in Florida, where the governor drew a map that would completely eliminate 2 representatives from the state of Florida, who happen to be, don't happen to be, no one happens to be one thing or another, but they are African Americans and people in Florida, and I certainly agree. I see that as a racist act. And even in the abortion debate that's going on right now about whether Roe versus Wade is going to be a thing of the past, that Supreme Court decision is there's racism in that political debate and discussion. Why? Because if Roe it doesn't exist anymore, those protections aren't there anymore, guess who is going to hurt more than anyone else? It's going to hurt poor people, and it's going to hurt Black and brown people more than anybody else, right? I think when I think about racism in politics, I think about the COVID-19 pandemic. When the pandemic hit, there was a lot of discussions about where the money was going, into what kind of communities was the money being sent to mitigate against COVID-19. And you know, the Biden administration had to bring in a person specifically to take a look at making sure that Black and brown communities were not overlooked. We see it in this whole debate among politicians about CRT, critical race theory. Those racism is part of that discussion in politics. So as Stephen Tom said, it's everywhere. It's embedded in our politics.
Yeah, all of that, everything you just said, all of it. Interestingly, if we could touch on the abortion debate, the Roe overturning, and the way I look at that is that, to me, is a specific attack on Black women. Obviously, it affects any woman who has an unwanted pregnancy for any reason. But you think about the medical progress that was made in gynecology was done on Black women without their consent, like their bodies were property. And we have come as far as we've come in gynecology because of that. And I know that there are also horrific things that were done in the Holocaust to the Jewish people, and I don't want to minimize that. But here in the States, it was up until I think the 19th, 20th century that some of those things were still done, still forced and unwanted sterilization of Black women. So when I think about the government and these policies taking over control over my body as a woman, as a Black woman, that's what I think about. I think about this is not necessarily new, but we've done this before. We've taken over women's bodies before, and we agreed that it was horrible then. So why is it different now? I don't mean to get on my high horse about that, but since you brought it up, Rev, you opened that can of worms. So I'll move on a little bit. I think that I'd like to hear a little bit from Samuel, some more thoughts about this, because I know that you are an advocate for social justice, and you recently put together the Massachusetts Black Lawmakers Roundtable that I had the privilege of participating in, which brought together elected Massachusetts leaders from around the state. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit about the work that you do, and if you encounter blatant or subverse racism when you're trying to get your work done over there at Tufts.
Well, I'm new at Tufts, so I can't really speak to my experience here yet, but enjoying it so far, and really just grateful to the university and to the people at the Tisch College of Civic Life for providing me with the resources to do my work. So I joined Tufts University in January as a non-resident senior fellow at the Center for State Policy Analysis, CSPA or CSPA, that's how we call it. And CSPA is, just a terrific think tank. It's been around since 2020. And the goal is the purpose of CSPA is to provide live analysis to politicians in Massachusetts, particularly state lawmakers, but all lawmakers on the various key issues before them, whether these are legislative issues or ballot questions, and just the importance of having real-time analysis and feedback is critical. Our lawmakers need that information, independent information, to be able to make decisions, but also the public needs that information as well to be able to gauge the trade-offs of different issues, and to also assess how they want to be engaged civically in the process as well. So it's a terrific organization. It's a terrific think tank that serves the people and the lawmakers here in Massachusetts. And so in joining CSPA in January, I've been working to identify different issues that I'm interested in that also overlap with CSPA and with the Tisch College of Civic Life. One of the things that I've wanted to do for a while is bring together Black lawmakers in Massachusetts and really to provide them with two big things. One is just a platform to get to know each other. I think there's a lot of power in social capital, just getting to know people. You never know what sort of ideas or innovations can come out when you put people in the same room together. And then secondly, to leverage the resources and the intellectual capital here at Tufts University to support those lawmakers in their work, in their decision making. And so, you talk about maternal health, for instance. The Tufts University School of Medicine just launched a Center for Black Reproductive Health and Justice, it's headed by a Black woman, an obstetrician gynecologist who is leading this work, and the center is not just going to focus on Massachusetts, but nationally, and provide leadership and advocacy at a national level. And so, the resources at Tufts are immense. It has the feel of a liberal arts college, but it's also a top tier research university. So with that comes a variety of departments and schools and centers and think tanks and whatnot. And so that's really exciting. And so, just what, in my role here again at CISFA, I'm working to incubate a few projects, and the Black Lawmakers Roundtable is the first of a few that I'll be launching in the coming months, and was really excited. And thank you to you for participating in it. Obviously, we were able to welcome 20 lawmakers to Tufts University last month. On April 25th, we had a wonderful lunch discussion. And then there were another 29 lawmakers who could not make it that day, but wanted to participate. And so all in all, we're dealing with a fantastic cohort of 49 Black lawmakers at all levels of government, from federal with Ayanna Pressley in the United States Congress, all the way down to school board and county government and our towns and our cities and everywhere in between. And so just really excited about the process and the ability to build these bridges. And again, when we think about representation, and I believe it is Megan that said this, it's so important to have people at that table and making those decisions. And so to quite literally have a table of 20 dynamic Black lawmakers from all parts of Massachusetts, as far west as Great Barrington, all the way to Boston, was really inspiring to see everybody here from the South Shore, from the Cape, all the way to the North Shore. So really excited by what's to come, and looking forward to what those lawmakers choose to do.
Yeah, it was a really awesome event. And I didn't mean to sound like I assumed that you were dealing with racism yourself at Tufts. I was meaning more about when you're doing the work and you're looking for places to do research, or you're trying to find out information, as you said, for these policies and these laws that are coming out. Have you found that it's difficult to get some of the information that you're looking for? Or have you found that in some of the laws that you're reviewing or the policies that you're reviewing, some of them are blatantly racist, but using perhaps, what was the phrase Megan said, coded language? So that's kind of what I'm wondering. Are you running into that in the work that you're doing right now?
So, there are many examples where, here in Massachusetts, we pride ourselves on being this sort of liberal utopia where, everybody sort of sits around and, we're all, happy, and lovey-dovey, kumbaya, whatever. And, to an extent that is true. I mean, this state does have a solid reputation of being the first in a variety of categories. But I think we tend to be very complacent in that. But, on any given day, you are dealing with blind spots, and, one doesn't necessarily have to be intentionally racist. I don't think that's what we see often. I think there are many people who are intentionally racist, who are intentionally sexist or whatever. But I think, oftentimes what we see is just people with blind spots. And, surely as a man, I have my blind spots as well. And so, when you talk to certain decision makers who are thinking about a particular bill or an ordinance or a budget line item or something, any sort of policy initiative, they may think it's the greatest idea since sliced bread, but then you start really sort of peeling through the layers, and then you realize, well, you didn't really think through it properly, or you didn't consult certain groups, or you didn't, strengthen certain issues. Reverend, you talked about housing. This is a key issue. That it's a very thorny issue in Massachusetts and everywhere, obviously, in the country, where you have certain urban areas that are picking up the slack, and a lot of suburban communities that just simply refuse to build more housing. And so this has become a real sort of tense issue for a lot of people. And housing is an area that's very important to me. It's near and dear to me. It's an issue that I've been involved in for several years now, around the creation of more affordable housing and really the creation of more home ownership opportunities as well. And so when we have some well-off communities that actively resist to create more housing, and then really burdening our already densely populated cities, and leaving it to them exclusively to do the work. That's just unfair, and so that's a common sort of tense issue. And to his credit, Governor Charlie Baker has been a really strong leader when it comes to housing issues, and working with pro-housing advocates and lawyers, legislators, and others to make this issue more prominent. And so, like, this is just one of many issues. The other one that always comes up as well is with the environmental community, environmental justice. When when we talk about this, oftentimes you're in a room with predominantly white people talking about the needs of people of color, and so it's just important to add nuance to those conversations and really be intentional about who is sitting there. So it's not necessarily like, oh, this is like mean-hearted racism. It's just little blind spots that can actually make a massive impact when it comes to determining policy. It's the difference between input and feedback. Do I bring you in at the input level when we're really just at a blank slate and we're trying to work together, or do I bring you in at feedback level where I already have an idea and it's already written somewhere and I just want to check off a box that I spoke to you? And so those are issues common that I see often, and just and to the point of in my particular work, not every university would just quickly embrace the idea of bringing Black lawmakers together, or bringing someone like me on campus, or whatever. And so that Tufts was really quick to create this opportunity for me. The director at CISPA, Evan Hurwitz, the dean at the Tisch College of Civic Life, Dana Cunningham, just having that vision and that willingness to support my ideas is super important. And so, having people at the top who sort of see the vision, who understand the vision, is critical. When we have the roundtable, the president of Tufts University was with us the entire time. He thought it was really important for him, for himself to be there, not just to give 5-minute remarks and leave, but to actually sit and observe. And so modeling that good behavior and being intentional about it is super important, and it's not something you see every day. So
yeah, all good points, and especially the point about the president of Tufts participating. I was very glad to see that there's that institutional leadership. It's something that we talk about here in Falmouth, is having institutional leadership. So the leadership on like the select board, or Shea running for school committee, that leadership is really important, and to bring in those perspectives. So I'd like to ask Shea if you could tell us, talk a little bit about you running for the school board and what kind of change you're hoping to see. I know that when I first learned that school committee members were elected, I was a bit surprised by that. I always, where I'm from, just assumed that if you were just interested in doing stuff for the schools, you just kind of volunteered. And so there's a cross between the schools that we think of course, as academic institutions and nurturing environments. But then we have the school committee, which is elected, which becomes a political position. So Shea, could you share a little bit about your interest in being on the school committee, and how, I guess, campaigning has been going for you?
Okay, so me running for school committee. So I'm already in the system. I'm already on the EL. That's like the English learning language. And so I'm involved. So with that, and then with my children, and then with different children who I meet up with, who I talk with. So it just gives me that drive that I can do more also in the school system, which I am happy to do it. I'm passionate about it. I'm willing to learn, because there are a lot to be learned, and I'm fine with that. And with the campaign, it's going good. I have a lot of support. People who I never knew, everyone reaching out to me to help me and all of that. And they believe in me, and that's powerful. Someone who they never know finally get to meet her and then they, you know, have that passion about that person. So I feel really, really happy about it. And I'm really grateful about it. So, and then what I want to bring in the school system, I have to wait till I get on the school board to see what is what before I can say so and so. I don't want to put it out there yet until when I reach in the system where I see what is what. I have to listen first what is what and observe before I can say this or I can say that. So
Yeah.
I'm on the hold with that.
I hear you. Yeah, so like I said, I was surprised that the school committee is in an elected position. I think it's great though, because I think it gives an opportunity for the people of Falmouth to be involved in their local politics, and not just people who have children in the school system. Because as we know, as we've been discussing, you know, the way that racism has really built itself into our policies and our laws is by not having that representation, not having people to put in their input from different views. And so even though like I don't have children in the school system, it's important to me because they're part of my community and I want to make sure that they're represented and you know, that I can have my voice heard for the students and for the future of our community. Because like Samuel said at the beginning, you know, the only way that we are going to remove these barriers of racism in our politics is by getting involved and making some of that change. And I have a lot of faith in the, I would say the younger generations, although sometimes I look around and realize I am the younger generation in Falmouth, but the younger generations that are going to come up behind us and really be putting in the work and standing on our shoulders and on our backs of the work that we've done. And so it's imperative that we do good work in removing some of these barriers and having these conversations where we can really tease out the places that we see racism in politics to ensure that we don't perpetuate those same issues.
Yeah.
Angie, I'm sitting on a question that I want to get to Samuel. You know, Samuel, you've said several times in your remarks that people have blind spots, and it's the blind spots that perpetuate racist behavior, racist decision making. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's sort of how I heard it. And if I'm wrong about that, please correct me. But I wonder, isn't it more than blind spots? Isn't it intentional? Aren't there people who know precisely what they're doing in terms of using politics to promote racist agendas? Again, to go back to, you know, critical race theory or the abortion debate or gerrymandering. Those aren't blind spots. People know exactly what they're doing. Or am I wrong about that?
Yeah, no, Reverend, you're correct. You know, perhaps I was being too nice or kind. But you know, I think so. So yeah, there are two types, right? In my opinion, one is you're sort of more overt, you know, politician or political activist or whatever who is intentionally engaging in policy violence, who is intentionally engaging in fear mongering, in divisiveness, in decision making that is meant to harm Black and Brown folks. And then you have, you know, your sort of more well-meaning type of politician who, you know, may want to do the right thing or thinks that they're doing the right thing. But, you know, I'll give you an example. So last year, one of the things that I ended up working heavily on was the Senate bill to finance the redevelopment of the Holyoke Soldiers Home. As you may know, you know, through the pandemic, the Soldiers Home in Holyoke, Massachusetts, was essentially condemned. It was the site of mass deaths of veterans. And a huge scandal that is still persisting today. And ultimately, the Commonwealth made the decision to demolish the Soldiers' Home and build a new one. And in it, there was in the legislation that was forwarded from the House to the Senate, there was an amendment for a project labor agreement, which is basically a document that outlines different protections for construction workers. But in it, there are certain requirements, for instance, that the workers used on such project would have to all be from a trade union. Which, in and of itself is a great thing. And I'm a pro-union, pro-labor person. But then you look underneath and you realize that the majority of Black and brown construction firms and construction workers are not associated with a union. And it's not by refusing to join one, but rather by organized labor's longstanding practice of exclusion. Then you start to run into some issues where sort of the well-meaning politicians who want to be pro-union and pro-worker and think it's a good thing to have a project labor agreement start to run against exclusion and practices that have meant to keep Black and brown folks out of the unions. And so this became an issue that took over my life last spring as we tried to navigate through it, and worked very closely with legislators, particularly in the Senate, to come up with a sort of a compromise language that really focused on accountability, opportunity, accessibility, and inclusion for people of color in the trades. Because it's not enough to say that this project needs to be 100% union, and then, oh, by the way, we have no people of color in the union, or we have no construction firms that are owned by people of color. And so, when you look at a $100 million project and you realize that less than 1% of it went to a minority firm, then, we have problems. And we see this story time and time again here in Massachusetts. Where people think that they're doing the right thing, and then you actually look at the numbers and you look at the the opportunities that are created, and then you realize that nothing was actually created, and that's sort of running into issues. So I think to your point, absolutely, there are politicians, and one thing that we're seeing now more and more of, to the critical race theory point, people are using local government, particularly school committees, town select boards, city councils, to wreak havoc, essentially, because they know that local government is the most direct form of government. It's the one that has the most impact on your life. And this is actually a strategy that a lot of sort of more conservative groups have used for years, where they sort of work on building a bench. You have people that run for more junior level positions. They run, they get elected, and they sort of build their resumes, and then in 10, 15 years they become a United States senator or a judge or whatever. And so this sort of intentionality of recruiting people, of supporting them, providing them with the tools to succeed in politics, is something that conservative groups have gotten down to a science, and it's actually pretty incredible to see how effective they are, and how there isn't much on the other side when it comes to getting people of color. I mean, there's actually been enormous growth in getting women to run for office and to win. You have phenomenal groups like Emily's List and others that have really done tremendous work. And we've seen, even since the election of Donald Trump, just the proliferation of women that have stood up and said, I'm running for something. And that's incredible, and we need more of that. And so, what we're sort of lacking now is just that crossover between, women and people of color, particularly Black women that need the support to be running for office, and then also Black men and ensuring that they have the support that they need to run for office. So I hear what you're saying for sure. We have politicians that are deliberately engaging in policy violence, that are deliberately engaging in practices and policies that are meant to exclude. and keep Black and brown folks poor and disadvantaged and excluded from wealth building and opportunities for social mobility. But then we also have, again, sort of your more well-intentioned politician that thinks that they're doing the right thing, whether, again, just, using the project labor agreement example of, yay, pro-labor, it sounds good, but then when you look underneath, you're like, oh, well, hey, look, again, you've excluded large swaths of people. So while you are pro-labor, you're actually also pro-exclusion. So, and that's a tough pill to swallow, particularly in a pro-union state like Massachusetts. But I think this was something Stephen, right, his name, that said this well, is, sometimes it's just, I have found personally success in really sitting down with people and helping them understand sort of where their ideas may be wrong, as opposed to shouting at you. I think there's a time and place where you have to step up. I'm paraphrasing, but Martin Luther King Jr. Was the one who said that a riot is the language of the oppressed. And so sometimes you do have to step up and make some noise. And sometimes you have to sort of call people in and build consensus and have those sort of conversations that lead to growth. So there's no silver bullet, but for sure, I found success in both.
Yeah. Oh man, you've given me so much, and I promise, Anji, I'm not going to dominate the rest of the conversation here. First of all, you've given us a great idea for a future show. I often wanted to talk about something very few shows talk about, and that is racism in unions. People don't want to talk about that. And so stay close to your email, because we're going to do a show about that, if I can get my co-producers to agree with that. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Even we're talking about the, you mentioned the Trump administration, and immediately what came to mind was the overt racism, the targeting Muslims, people of the Muslim faith, of Islam, and the bans, right, on allowing people from predominantly Muslim countries to come in. I mean, that's just again, that's not a blind spot. That's just kind of overt racism. And we did a show about racism and immigration, and I think we're seeing it right now. We're seeing it right now. We have thousands of people at our southern border who are petitioning, trying to get into this country and for refuge and to flee the terror that occupies their lives in Honduras and Colombia and Venezuela and Mexico and other places in the Southern Hemisphere. And both the Biden administration and the Trump administration have been so resistant to allowing for a flow of individuals from those communities, those countries into our country. And yet when the war in Ukraine takes place, the whole world says, oh yeah, we got to let Ukrainians in. I mean, the Europeans did the same thing when Syrians were trying to flee the terror in their country, and they went to Europe, and the Europeans closed the door on them and wouldn't let them cross borders and what have you. But now everybody wants to let the Ukrainians, and they should. I mean, before my Ukrainian friends come after me, yeah, we should be admitting Ukrainians as refugees in this country, but we can do both. There's enough land in this country, there's enough opportunity in this country for us to do both. People in need of refuge from the Southern Hemisphere, people in need of refuge from Baltic areas like Ukraine. So again, there's so much more. I appreciate your response to that. And Shea, before I forget it, I ran for the school committee, which is called the school board in Connecticut, and I got elected. And then my peers chose me to be the chair of the school board. And boy, I am going to be cheering you and praying for you and hoping that all goes well for you. But more importantly, if you are elected, to offer my counsel to you if that's something you might find helpful to you. So,
Okay, thank you.
You got anything, you got more, Rev?
oh, I was taking notes on everything that Samuel was saying. I got so much more, but I'm gonna leave it there for now because we probably should go to the second question.
Yeah, this has been great. We are gonna go to our second question. So we will go to our people on the street to answer the question, how do we keep racism out of politics? So let's go hear what they have to say.
I think that, we have two ways that we have to attack it. The first is that we have to call it out. And it really is incumbent upon white folks to do that. People of color, BIPOC, members of our community or elected officials or members of our committees can't be carrying that weight. White folks need to do that work. And so in the instance that I just used, when we hear individuals using coded language or really, euphemisms that we know what they're really talking about. We know that that's race-based in terms of their objections to projects or initiatives. We need to call that out, and we need to point to what it is, and we need to educate. We need to unpack it, and we need to push back against it. And that is the job of folks in our community to make sure that we are constantly vigilant for that. And then the other way is representation. We have to have more voices engaged in decision-making. Politics, no matter how good the intentions are of the folks that come to the table, if everyone at the table comes from a similar life experience, you're not going to get, a well-rounded decision at the end of the day. You need people that come from really a diverse background, that bring to that decision-making a variety of lived experiences.
I think that getting racism out of politics, if we accept the challenge, is a multi-generational thing. I think that because it is so pervasive, we have to educate ourselves. We have to become activists and be willing to speak out in constructive ways. And I emphasize the constructive aspect of it. To be angry may be justified, but personally, to be angry is generally not very productive. I think that the few times where I felt that I had to speak up in some sort of a confrontational situation, they were few and far between. And I'd like to think that I've contributed more to my friendships and society around me by being firm in my resolve, but taking actions that are constructive. So I would say that the way we get racism out of politics is we get more people of varying ethnicities involved in our political system, whether it's at the local level, the state level, the national level. We have to be active.
I know folks like to think that we are, we don't have a lot of diversity, and certainly we are not like a large urban environment where there's greater diversity, but there is diversity in the town of Falmouth, and we don't call upon it enough and really celebrate and draw upon that richness to make sure that the decision makers in the room represent our community. So the greater the range of voices at the table, the better the decision is going to be. And ultimately, you're going to undercut that racism if there are more people in the conversation and are being equally heard and equally respected when those decisions are being made.
So we've just heard from our people on the street answering the question, how do we keep racism out of politics? And I have to say, I really loved what Megan had to say. And she said that it can't be on the backs of our BIPOC community members to do the work, that the white folks have to do the work too. And in that moment, I thought to myself, I am really going to miss her on the select board. She is not running again, and she has been a tremendous ally on the board because she has done exactly that. There have been times where people have used that coded language at our meetings to talk about when they say othering or those people, as she mentioned in the first question, specifically about housing, but it's come up in other spaces. And I'm just thankful that I don't always have to be the one to call that out. But we have to call it out. We have to say something if we want it to change. We can't just sit idly by and pretend that everything's okay, because that's how we perpetuate, as Samuel, as you called it, what is it, racism, politic violence is what you call
Policy
it?
violence.
Policy violence. I've not heard that before, but I think that's a really good way of putting that, because it is a form of violence. Like I was mentioning earlier about, women's health and maternal health and the abortion issue that's on the table again, but also thinking about housing and redlining, and how the redlining not only caused Black and brown people to lose out on generations of potential wealth by owning homes in neighborhoods that increased in value, but also that Black people were put into neighborhoods that were closer to factories, and there are still sustained and systemic health concerns and issues that people have because of where they were forced to live. So I think that policy violence is a perfect name for what it is. So I have said how much I appreciate Megan and her challenging our white community members to be the ones to speak up. And I hope that people will feel empowered through these conversations and through gaining of knowledge to be the ones to speak up. Steve mentioned, I believe it was in the first question, how, or maybe it was the second question, how he can recall speaking up and it's few and far between, but that it was in those moments that he felt like he had to do it. And so I hope that we have community members who feel empowered to stand up in those moments where they feel like it needs to be done, and not wait on the Black and brown people to do it, or to feel like they get permission to do it. That's something else that I've kind of heard, is that there's a concern sometimes with white people that they don't want to be the ones to speak up because they don't want to seem like they know everything, or be the white savior. And I'll tell you, when it comes to those board meetings and those school committee meetings and that coded language comes up, I don't want to be the one. I don't want to be the one, the only person of color on that board, or one of few people of color to be the ones to stand up against that coded language and that racism. And so we really do need our white colleagues and our white community members to be, as Rev likes to say, accomplices and not just allies. So I'd like to ask Samuel, how do we keep racism out of politics?
Yeah, just on the point of policy violence for a second, it's a term that is being popularized nowadays. You have a number of groups that are using it prominently, the Poor People's Campaign and others that are beginning to uplift the term, precisely to the point that you mentioned. These decisions, these policy decisions, have violent life or death impacts, whether it's environmental health or crime or, the next thing. So, it's not just a theoretical exchange of ideas. Policy has consequences. In terms of, how to sort of root out racism in politics, so two things. One, yes, we need people in privilege to step up. Any sort of privilege, racial privilege, gender privilege, sexuality privilege, language privilege, you name it, economic privilege, educational privilege. I mean, you can go down the list, right? So anyone who has any inch of privilege should be leveraging their privilege. There's nothing inherently wrong with privilege, in my opinion. It's really what you do with it or what you don't do with it that's the issue. Like with your social capital, your financial capital, your intellectual capital, you can accumulate all the capital you want in the world, but the question is, what are you doing with it? The ancient Egyptian pharaohs used to think that you would die with all your wealth. And they were wrong. You don't die with your wealth. We have a reverend on the call, so I'm not going to preach at you, but
tell them to send the money to the church. That's what they do. Send your money to the church.
Send the money to the church. Send it to send it to your house of worship. Feed the poor. Feed the hungry. House the needy. That's what you got to do. And at the end of the day, that's really what your legacy will be, right? It's not about how much money did you accumulate, or how many credentials did you accrue? And so, for the people that are in privilege, accomplices, yes, I like to use the term co-conspirator. That's what we need. We need more white people to step up. And I understand, there's a real inherent concern of the white savior complex. But we do need white people to really stand shoulder to shoulder in the fight for racial justice and equity. Same as we need men to step up and fight for gender equality and women's health and women's rights and all sorts of other issues. And so, but what really excites me, and I'll stop here, is the United States Census Bureau says that by 2050, this country will be majority people of color. And so the new majority, right, the new American majority is what excites me. And it excites me for the same reason why it freaks out certain people, because the tables will have really turned in terms of the vastness of people of color in this country. You look around, particularly throughout the South, throughout the Southwest, in many communities, if you don't speak Spanish, frankly, you're not really moving on. There are many communities that will prioritize Spanish speakers, whether it's hospitals or schools or courts or police departments or whatever, just because of the growth. And even here in Massachusetts, the growth of people of color. And so the new American majority is exciting me because, as Ayanna Pressley and so many others say, it's not enough just to, bring chairs to an existent table. You really have to assemble your own table. You can't keep using the systems and the tools of the past, because those are the tools that got us to the problems that we're at today. We need new systems, we need new tools, we need new approaches and new procedures, and that requires a sort of radical reimagining, a retooling of how we do things. And so, we're going to need a new table, and that table is going to have a bunch of new chairs, and it's going to look like a very vastly different country. I think, the founding fathers, if they were alive today, would be scared. I think they would all have freaked out just by the diversity of our decision makers today. That we have a Black woman on the Supreme Court of the United States. That's scary for some people, and you should be scared. and so, I think that's what really excites me, is that we just have a completely different cohort of people that are stepping up, whether they're running for things or they're leading companies or they're in any sort of decision-making capacity. And that new American majority is going to help create a more just, more equitable country that is fair and that's inclusive for everyone. And at the end of the day, that is racial justice, making sure that those who have been historically and systemically excluded are called in, are brought in to the decision-making table, and are given the ability to help determine their future. And I can't think of anything more American than that. I mean, this is a country that was founded on many ideals and many practices, some good, some bad, but the principle of self-determination is as American as it gets, and allowing people to be part of their decision-making, allowing people to be part of charting their own future, and one that is free and fair and equitable, is something that we should be aspiring to as a country. So the new American majority excites me because I know that it's going to be one that works for everyone.
That was beautifully said. I am also excited about the future, and I know that the people who are scared about it are the ones who would uphold these same structures that have kept us where we are. And that's why it's so important for us to get involved at every level, at the school level, at the town level, and all the way up. as you mentioned, you mentioned it a while ago, conservative groups have gotten really good at that because they've recognized the power that can be held and wielded and not shared at every level. And so they've figured out ways to hold on to that power. And I think that's something that whatever you would call the liberals or just different groups of people should also be looking at and recognize, not just looking at doing it, but recognizing the importance of these local groups and local elected officials like the select board and like the school committee. And when you were talking about policing specifically and that representation, I noticed, Reverend Will, your eyes kind of got big. I'm curious if you want to make comment on that. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I am.
It wouldn't be the first time. Well, let me first. I'll say a couple of things. One, Samuel is absolutely right about how, and you, Anji, we're talking about how conservatives in particular have a playbook that has been used now for several years. This didn't just happen overnight, but for several years. And the Koch brothers were specifically good at funding efforts to take over school boards, school committees, and to begin to have effect on the policies on the local level, and then to groom those individuals to then go on to state legislative positions and then on to federal government positions. So yeah, the playbook's out there, and they've been using it for some time. And well, the other thing, I know we're getting close to the end of time, and there are a couple other things I wanted to share. One, I love Stephen Tom. He's a friend, and I have great respect for him. And he's right that we've got to have, in order to erase racism in politics, we've got to have more folks who are activists like he is. And we need, like Megan was saying, we need some white folks to be activists or co-conspirators. I like that term as well, Samuel, and not just on the sidelines as allies cheering, but in the struggle, in the midst of the battle. But I disagree with Stephen about the issue of anger, and Samuel, you raised this as well. No, we need some righteous anger. When I think about how races, even today, how they treat Rashida Tlaib or AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or Ayanna Pressley, and how disrespectful they are of these women holding these elected positions. We should be angry about that, and we should speak to that. We can't just let that go by. But the oppressor is always trying to keep the person that's oppressed from being angry. I'm going to step on you. I'm going to put my knee on your neck. And I'm going to hold it there for 9 minutes and 30 seconds. But, you don't have a right to be angry about that. Why the hell not? I better be angry about that.
Mm-hmm.
A whole bunch of people need to be angry about that. So that's the only area where I disagree, not sort of disagree. I disagree with what Stephen was saying. So we need to have some righteous anger. And you've mentioned several times, Samuel, the need to focus on environmental justice. And yes, that is where another place where racist politicians have used racist policy to harm Black and brown people in this country. We ought to be angry about that, and we ought to take steps to change that. And then on the criminal injustice system that we have here in this country, that is a place where there is a need for drastic, radical reformation. We can get into this whole debate about defunding, and I never liked that language. I'll just be honest. I never liked the language of defund the police. I think that was a misstep by by the activists that were promoting the philosophy. I agree with the philosophy behind it, that we shouldn't be shoveling millions and millions and millions of dollars into these military forces that are masquerading as local police departments, and then having them terrorize Black and brown communities. No, I am not in favor of doing that. So I don't know if I answered your question, Angie, but that's what those are the things on my mind.
Yeah, you did. I'd like to ask Shea to tell us what's on her mind. What are you thinking about how we keep racism out of politics? How do we keep racism out of the work that is done by local elected boards like the select board and like the school committee? What are your thoughts on that? You're muted.
Oh, that's a tricky one. Okay. Sometimes it kind of seems hard on how to keep it out because of sometimes of the mentality of people. So with what I just think we just have to work together, and we have to put in some hard work to get it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a really good point that it's people's mentalities that we really have to change. It has to be a mindset shift on doing things differently. People who watch the show or know me know I'm a really big supporter of affordable housing. And we've recently been talking about just the term affordable and how that triggers something in people. And if we want people to have a mindset shift of what that means, we have to change their mentality. We have to get them to have that mindset shift. We can't simply just say, well, no, that's not what we mean when we say affordable housing. That's not going to work. We have to actually change people's mindset. And I think we have to do the same thing with politics. One, we have to have these conversations that really draw out the ways that racism manifests itself in politics and this policy violence. And then we also have to spend time changing people's mentality. And I don't mean that in a way of we need to push our views on other people. We just need to educate people, and we need to inform them and show them. I can't imagine that anyone would read The Color of Law, which is a very good book. I can't imagine anybody would read that and then not believe that these policies were intentionally racist, that they were not intentionally racist. There's no way you could read that book with all of the facts and the information. And that's the kind of thing that we need to do, is we need to inform people on how these policies do indeed enact violence, whether immediately or long-term. And I think that's why it's so wonderful, the work that you're doing, Samuel, where you're looking at policies in real time to be able to say, this is what this policy says it's going to do, and here's the deeper dive, and here's the information that you need to know about this policy. And I think that kind of work, I hope we see that on a larger scale. It's wonderful that you're doing that, and I hope that we're able to do that on a much larger scale, but then also at a much more local scale. On the select board, our job is to create and edit policies that affect the people in the town of Falmouth. And there's 5 of us on this board, and we have a little bit of diversity now, but still, I know that there are times that we are not seeing a good representation of all the people who these policies are going to affect. And we can ask people to come to our board meetings and to give us ideas, but people have lives and they have things that they need to do. And so to have a way for us to really look at these policies and how they're implemented, and then also have a mechanism to go back and edit policies once we recognize that they are problematic or they're not doing what they were intended to do. I think that would really go a long way in keeping racism out of our politics. So I want to thank you all for participating in this amazing conversation about racism in politics. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Samuel, thank you, Shea, for stepping up and running for the school board and in our community. We really need the representation, we need the voices. And thank you, Rev, for always being wonderful and awesome to talk to. Thank you to Deb and Alan at FCTV for helping us put this show together, doing all of the really great behind the scenes work to actually make this a show. You are appreciated. And until next time, thank you for joining us on The Conversation.